I think the first thing I just want to say to anyone when I'm speaking now, and I think we're all there, is, just to acknowledge the times we're in. I think you folks really your entire life, whether it was September 11th or the stock market crashes in the mid 2000s, this term unprecedented is losing its meaning because it's been around your life so much. But we are in a time that is certainly different. There's certainly some concerns out there, and I think we're all feeling a whole host of emotions, from fear and anxiety to anticipation to anger, and I think all of those are normal. I think it's particularly interesting for those of us interested in sports, because I think we get in this industry to a certain degree because we like the knowns. We know at the end of the week if we've won or if we've lost. We know if our best player had a good game or a bad game, had so many rebounds, didn't, et cetera. And similar on the business side, do we hit our goals in terms of sponsorship sales or attendance, or folks different affinity goals, et cetera. So we're used to the knowns, and we're in this time of a whole lot of unknown, and I think we're going to be there for a while. I talk a lot about my father, and I just wrote this book. I'm going to give you folks a little bit on that, but the one thing that I think he did really well was deal with ambiguity. And we can talk a little bit about it. It's not as heavily on the sports side of the story, although there are examples there. But I think the best example was his time in Ireland, both as ambassador. Prior to becoming ambassador of Ireland, you had a major conflict between Catholics and Protestants in Ireland that went on for thousands of years. And my father was very heavily involved in what they called the peace process. And, I remember being in Ireland, and there were, piles of rubble on the street that used to be buildings. There was barbed wire. There were tanks driving up and down neighborhood streets. And, when my father was there involved in that work, there was a lot of ambiguity. There was a lot of divisiveness, polarization. People were taking sides over and over again. And, he just kept focusing on staying calm, paying attention to the solution that they're trying to work on in the moment, whether it was funding integrated schools, funding integrated workforce development projects, really focusing on that, not getting caught up in the emotions. That doesn't mean he didn't have them, but certainly, trying to remain centered, where he could make good decisions and contribute in a way that was meaningful and constructive. And after 30 years of doing that, President Obama named him as ambassador to Ireland because of that work. So, and not that you're looking for some sort of personal pat on the back every time, but that if you do the right things over and over again, I think you can accomplish significant things, even if you don't really know when or where the outcomes are going to come about. So I think that's an example or an experience that I have seen firsthand of dealing with ambiguity in an effective way. In the book, and when I talk about my family's history, we've been involved in the sports industry for over a century. So really more than 100 years now. And my grandfather, Art Rooney, started the Steelers back in 1932. Prior to that, he was a semi-pro boxer and semi-pro baseball player, and then got involved in the promotion of those sports. So we've been in this industry a long, long time. And, I hope we've done some things that are meaningful to help it out. It's certainly been a wonderful place to work and really build our family's business and life. And so, I just, anyone that's interested in this world, I'm always interested to talk to them. So what my grandfather did, who started the Steelers, was he was born in an immigrant community in the United States, and then he started the team during the Great Depression. And both of those scenarios, he saw a lot of people suffering. And so he talked about, he wanted his organization to be about respecting the dignity of every person that the organization came in contact with. And I remember when I started with the team back in the 70s, he said, I don't care if it is a player who is upset about their contract. I don't care if it's a fan who's upset about their seats, or someone from the media who's written a bad story about us. Back then, most stories were written in the newspaper. Can you get beyond that and respect the dignity of the person you're dealing with? And that is the fundamental core value of the Steeler organization, which is where my family started. Look, we're a big organization. There's certainly days and decisions we make that miss that mark, but having that as sort of the focal point, I think has created something that is special. And we've built a fan base all across the country in many ways because people feel at least an attempt to be authentic and genuine in that relationship. But my grandfather wasn't the greatest businessman of all time. So we had, he actually was a really good promoter, but wasn't great at the operational side. So the Steelers lost more games. We had players quit. We were the worst team in football from 1932 to the 1970s. Off the field, we were equally as poor. So, you make these relationships with sponsors. We had a car dealer and we had a sponsorship relationship with this dealer, but he gave us the worst car on the lot. It couldn't go uphill, and everything in Pittsburgh is on a hill. So my father used to have to put the car in reverse and back up the hill, and it says official vehicle of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I think you get a sense of how bad things were. My father came in the late 50s, early 1960s, and really began to transform the team. And from 1970, which is considered the birth of the modern era of professional football, the Steelers have won more games, more championships, sent more players to the Hall of Fame than any other team. And off the field, we're in the bottom quartile of markets. We're somewhere between 22 and 26, depending on what year they seem to count these markets. But we're in the top 5 in merchandise. We're in the top 5 in brand affinity. We're in the top 5 in television ratings every year. And it was my father who really was able to marry that business acumen with that sense my grandfather had of trying to treat people with respect and decency, and the balance of those qualities really, I think, created an organization that has significantly outpaced its market in so many ways and built this national, international fan base. So I talk about that story and how he transformed the Steelers. One of the things that was unique that he did was he made this significant commitment to what he would call integration. We would call diversity and inclusion now. And from 1968 until 1968 to 1976, the Steelers drafted more players from historically Black colleges and universities than any other team. That team went on to win four Super Bowl championships in 6 years. So this commitment to diversity wasn't just an altruistic thing. It created a real competitive advantage for the Steelers. The other stories I talk about are his work in the National Football League. My father was the lead negotiator between labor and management. He was actually at the first meeting between players and owners in 1957 when they created the idea of a players association, a union. And my grandfather was actually the person that put the proposal on the table for the owners to vote on letting the players to have a union. So my father was the chief negotiator there, and he built the free agency agreement that came around in 1993, and that's been sort of the bedrock of almost 30 years of labor peace. And how he negotiated, and always looking for win-win situations in negotiation was sort of what he was known for. He created the Rooney Rule, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, which is the NFL's diversity hiring policy. And I talk about the pathway to that and the steps he took to really try and step up and make a difference. And I talk about the challenges that we face today. What he did, almost 20 years ago was very significant in his time. And I think he did some pretty important things, in the first 10, 15 years, but the numbers aren't where they need to be. And so I talk a little bit about that in the book. So those are 3 of the stories related to sports. And then I talk about this time in Ireland. And what I think is important about Ireland for folks in the sports world, and you certainly don't have to go to a foreign country. There's plenty of things to do in your community. And we've tried to do a lot, but we don't manufacture steel. We're not going to come up with a cure for cancer. Sports is about this very special relationship that allows someone to live vicariously through someone else's actions, but it's about them and the passion they have and how they access that passion, those emotions inside themselves, maybe share it with their community in a very meaningful way. So I believe, and my observations are very clear, that people want to see authenticity. They want to see sincerity. It's great to have community events. It's great to write checks to organizations throughout the community. But if you really want people to feel that your organization is unique, is special, is something that meets that passion that they're going to give you, which is really the quality, that's the relationship you have with them. If you really want to do something that meets that, you have to have a commitment to the community that goes beyond, just sort of a simple token events, et cetera, that people really have to feel that sense. And my father's work in Ireland, I think he did a lot of things in Pittsburgh, and obviously those were important, but it showed that his interest in a community and solving a pretty major community problem was real and sincere, and people felt that. And again, he wasn't doing it for the team, but I think it meant a lot to our fan base that you had someone in a leadership position that was that authentic, was that willing to take on a real challenge within the community. So the point of the story is, the question is out there: can you be a good person and win? And I try to demonstrate through my father's life that with many failures and challenges, et cetera, but you can really affect change in your industry and beyond your industry, and have those good values, be a decent person, treat people with respect, and still achieve the highest standards in the industry. So that's sort of a high level description. I look forward to, Craig, questions with you and certainly with the students. Thank you for taking the time today, and I look forward to us talking here. So there's an old it's not a fable. It's a sort of one of those trite sayings about your perception is your reality. And my father believed the exact opposite. He said, your reality is your perception. If you act a certain way over time, people will believe that that's who you are. And so I think this speaks more to the internal side, but then it reflected out by doing these things. My father was about as good at hiring as anyone I've ever seen in my life. And he understood just not just in building teams for the Steelers, but in other aspects of his life, that team building, the people you surround yourself with, the people that you're part of are going to dictate your success in such a significant way. So, we've had 3 coaches in 50 years. We're at year 52 now with Mike Tomlin. And that's pretty rare. There's some teams that have 3 coaches in 1 year. And over the last 50, we've only hired 3. And my father, it's a great example because he went through this type of process with all of his hires. And so what he would do is, he'd make sure that the X's and O's were good, that they had the capabilities to do the job. And you need to be qualified. You need to have competence within the field that you're going to achieve. But then after that, the conversations with each of these guys all had to do with, things that were how they engage socially in the world. He would talk to them about their mother. He would talk about their wife. He would talk about their children. He would talk about coaching mentors they had. And he would get them in as many social situations as he could, because he was looking for clues. If I say to you, Craig, do you have high values? Your answer is obviously going to be yes. But he was looking for examples, particularly as it related to how they reflected on people who were important in their life. Did they look at them from a utilitarian standpoint? Were they objects to these people in terms of getting ahead and they were sort of going to use them? Or were those relationships really meaningful? And did they talk about the things that were meaningful in their life? Did they talk about how those people solve problems together? Because that's what team building is all about. It's not, we all want to win the Super Bowl. The objective at this level is very clear. It's how are you able to relate to folks to get things done collaboratively, and really try to understand how those relationships work, how people in these top positions valued other people. So I think, the hiring process and how he brought people on board and how that was unique was really important. The other, as I said, was, he committed to diversity in ways that he was ahead of the game. He brought a gentleman in named Bill Nunn. Bill was, I think, the 3rd African-American scout in the National Football League. And Bill really, as I said, he brought these folks in from the HBCUs. Mel Blount is a great example. Mel is a Hall of Fame cornerback we had back in the 1970s. They actually changed the rules because of Mel. But Mel had, never had a white teammate or white coach in his life before he got to the Steelers. And Mel talks about, that Bill was there and really played, this role that we would call an inclusion officer today, but really an ambassador. And he talked about what my father, what Coach Knoll, Chuck Knoll was our head coach back then, that they really believed in merit, and that decisions were going to be based on merit, and things like race were not going to be part of the process. And Mel said he wanted to believe that, but he really had no experience like that. And in 1974, Coach Knoll named another HBCU player, Joe Gilliam, as the first African-American starter prior to a season beginning. And it really demonstrated this idea that these guys were committed to, walking the walk. And then a guy like Mel said, that just built this level of trust in him. He felt that he was in a system where it was going to be based on merit, that the things that were said were going to be, performed in terms of behavior. So building those types of teams, making hiring decisions like that, and then behaving in a way that reflects what you say you believe, I think those were the essential qualities. And then you're able to be successful, and then the external market customers, fans, et cetera, can believe in you. So that was a little bit long-winded of an answer there, but I was trying to demonstrate, how he put those things together, and then how that being able to really build something that's successful, it's easier for fans, et cetera, to latch onto that. Another little bit of a long answer after this. I'll try to be more efficient with some of these answers, but it's a good segue, because you talked about shared values. Shared values are critical, but you also need people that are committed to the behavior. It's not just believing the same things, it's that you're going to take action out of those things. And I think that's really was the difference between my father and so many other folks. And the Rooney Rule is a great example of that. My father was named. So Tony Dungy, who played for us and was part of that team in the 1970s, Tony lives in Tampa, Florida, was the first African-American coach to win the Super Bowl. He was actually the first African-American defensive coordinator with the Steelers. He was also the youngest, named back in 1982. And so Tony gets fired by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and a woman at the University of Pennsylvania does a study. Her name is Janice Madden, and she demonstrated that minority coaches were being fired with a greater success rate than their non-minority counterparts. So in a lot of industries, when a study like that comes out, there's a lot of, people sort of run and hide. They may come up with a PR response. And my father and Paul Tagliabue, who was the commissioner of the National Football League back then, really embraced the study and said, this is actually what we need. And having an external criticism of where the league was at really gave them, the strength and the cudgel, if you will, to push the rest of the owners into, we have to do this in a serious and meaningful way. So Commissioner Tagliabue named my father as the head of a new committee on diversity in coaching. They spent about a year coming up with what we know as the Rooney Rule. The core part of the Rooney Rule that we're familiar with is this idea of a diverse hiring slate. So in the last 3 to 5 interviewees, when you're hiring a head coach, now a general manager, there has to be at least one minority candidate in the pool. So that's what people, when they refer to the Rooney Rule, that's most of the time what they're talking about. But my father spent, as I said, this year building this consensus. And then the next 15 years, every time there was a job opening, he and a gentleman named John Wooten, who was another one of the first African-American scouts in the National Football League, he was at the Cowboys and the Eagles, they would be on the phone with the owner, the coach, the general manager, whoever was making the hire, and they would talk about the availability of minority candidates. And this advocacy was so important. When I wrote the book, I talked to folks from Google who are still having their own problems with diversity in tech, but they've done a lot of studying of this. And they said, when you have a change initiative, particularly related to diversity, you need someone at the highest level to be a champion on sort of this daily basis. So for this first 15 years of the Rooney Rule, you saw a 300% increase in terms of minority head coaches hired, general managers. You saw an overall transformation where 40% of the assistant coaches were African American, and those jobs don't even require a Rooney Rule, don't even have a Rooney Rule requirement. You saw a 20% increase in the on-field referees, and that also now includes women referees. And so while my father was the champion or the advocate, you really saw this significant change. So I think he did a pretty significant job. And then you've seen it during that time. You saw the rule go to Amazon, to Goldman Sachs. Some of the largest industries in the world use a version of the Rooney Rule, and in some ways they do a better job than the NFL. And so all of that work, I think my father really was a champion of and played a significant role. My brother is now the chairman of the diversity committee. Him and there's a whole host of folks who I think are really committed to try to do this in what is a modernized world as effectively. But you do have a transition in leadership, and the way my father led is different than the way my brother or other people lead. So that transition, really, there's a challenge there, and that gap has to be filled. And it's natural that it takes time to fill in this type of, with this type of change. It's natural that it will take time for leadership to fill that void in the same way that a previous leader who was very effective does. So that's one, is where do we go from here? Leadership. The second is the pipeline. So, because there have been, and unfortunately in some ways still are, although I think it's much less now in this case, horrible stereotypes. There weren't a whole lot of African-American quarterbacks for a long, long time in football. And, not only from a positional standpoint was that bad, but the best track to become a head coach is quarterback coach, offensive coordinator, head coach. The rules have tilted so much towards the offensive side of the ball that position is so important. So you have this gap of folks who are in the quarterback coaching position. So we have a real challenge when it comes to the pipeline, and that's not going to get fixed. There's no silver bullet here. That's not going to be fixed by the end of this season. There has to be a concentrated effort. And I know there are some initiatives going that direction. Frankly, there needs to be more, but you're really going to have to fill up the offensive side of the ball with minority coaches. And right now, most minority coaches are on the defensive side of the ball. So that's a technical challenge that you can apply, aspects of the rule, whether it's an update or an augmentation of the rule, that we're going to need to get offensive coaches. Tony Dungy, again, talks about innovation. The tool we're using right now, interviews are conducted through this. These were things my father couldn't even imagine, 20, 25 years ago. So the idea that we're going to have to find ways to use innovation and how is that going to apply to making sure we're not creating a further gap, but also going the other way where you have, it allows more minority candidates to participate in the process. And then we look at women coaches. And I think when you look at the skill sets of women, analytics, training, strategic planning, those are three of the most critical components for being a coach. And in every study I've ever seen, women far outpace men in those skill sets. So I think in a competitive environment, I think you're going to have a woman head coach in the next 10 to 15 years in the National Football League, just because they're so much stronger in some of these core skills that are required to coaching. So those are all some of the things going into the future. The one thing, though, that I think has to be mentioned, and this is a role that everyone on this call can continue to play a part of, the media plays a part of it. And like I said, I think there's a lot of genuine interest in the National Football League in getting this right, but there has to be pressure. When someone conducts a token interview, that's an insincere effort, and you can't legislate ethics. You can't put something in the rule that is going to make someone be sincere, but you can continue to create transparency. The public can continue to put pressure on folks. I think that is going to be more critical to dealing with that issue of a lack of sincerity or lack of authenticity in the interview process than any sort of process improvement. So I know I've said a lot there, but that's sort of the history of the Rooney Rule, and at least what I see is the challenges and opportunities going forward. Well, so my father did things a little out of the box again, and I think it's why we've been successful with, at least with our coaching hires over the last 50 years. So with the Tomlin interview, we started with 37 candidates, and we find them from assistant coaches, college coaches, a whole host of places. So we started with 37. We had a list of 37. I believe there were 8 minority coaches in that original pool. We go down to 12. So the first level, we did some cursory interviews. My father did a few of them, but I think there was a group of folks who conducted those. You got down to 12. Then you went from 12 to 4, and then we hired Mike Tomlin as the coach. So we took probably twice we probably did more than twice the number of people in the pool, and we probably took twice the amount of time, which everyone gets concerned. A lot of people make these hires, and I think they respond a little bit too much to the media, a little bit too much to their fan base. My father was always patient. He didn't mind sort of criticism at that time, because he understood, he wanted to be hiring someone that would be with us for decades. And he understood taking the time, getting to know Mike Tomlin the way he did in the interview process. Mike and he spent hours together. Mike and Kia, Mike's wife, and my mother and father, spent tremendous amount of time together in social situations. So, it took time to sort of build that rapport, build that relationship, get that understanding. I talked about those things a little bit earlier. But so from our standpoint, it was a broad pool. It wasn't just offensive and defensive coordinators. We talked to folks who were assistant coaches. We talked to folks who were coordinators on the college level. So we tried to have as broad a swath of talent in the pool as we possibly could. In terms of finding them, that used to be somewhat of a challenge, but at least in the National Football League, we've done a lot in terms of video interviews. So now every coach is given the chance to do video interviews, so that you can access some experience with them without even engaging with them in a direct conversation. We have a book of talent, and this was part of the Rooney Rule. This is part of the work that my father did. So every coach, who they worked with, other coaches. Did they work with Coach Belichick in New England? Did they work with someone else in Cleveland or where have you? What players did they coach? What was the performance of those players under them, and how effective were they? Looking out years after, did they develop something while that coach was training them that demonstrated maybe success afterwards? So those are some of the tools that are available to find these coaches. The idea that you can't find them, I think is I don't buy that anymore. That might have been the case before you had some of this technology, and this technology I think is going to make it even more. What we need to work on, this isn't the question you asked, what we need to work on is developing folks so that they can gain better experiences and move up the ladder more effectively, so that folks are seeing them as making the harder decisions that are required to become a head coach. So that's an interesting question. The folks that my father worked with, there's an external group called the Fritz Pollard Alliance. Fritz Pollard was an African-American coach of the Akron Pros back in 1920. And the Alliance is the professional service organization for minority employees throughout the National Football League, particularly coaching and scouting. They have worked to sort of survey folks, minority folks of a whole different, not just racially, but a sort of broad portfolio of folks, to try and have a list to get minority ownership. The NFL has not required that. It's kind of a difficult thing. I mean, these teams are really, really expensive. So, someone would really have to make a choice that that's something they would want to invest in. Steelers, we have a few minority partners. John Stallworth, who was he's a Hall of Fame receiver, went on to a very successful business career in Huntsville, Alabama. related to the space industry, is one of our partners. So there's several minority folks who have participation in groups, but there is no there's no what we call the primary owner right now, and there's no rule or pathway that would say that has to happen. But I know there are efforts to try and identify folks who would be who may have interest. Again, they have to want it too, because it's a challenging thing, because the league doesn't own the teams in most cases. So the person making the decision is usually going to go to the person that offers them the most money. John Wadrick is a gentleman who runs all of our entertainment. We lost these because of COVID, but we had the Rolling Stones, Kenny Chesney, Taylor Swift, and then we have hundreds of other events throughout our stadium. John is the person that brings these folks to the Steelers. For 3 years straight, every month, he sent his resume and a letter to my father. He went to events that my father was at, and eventually my father gave his resume to me. I was doing a side project. He goes, hire this guy and see if he's any good. So he actually worked in my basement for a month. And now he runs all this stuff for the Steelers in terms of our engagement with the entertainment community. But Steve, what you're doing is part of the path. I mean, we didn't know John Wadrick from Adam, and it was because he just stayed in our face. So that is always a good plan. There's a point where you can overstep the line. I'm on the record in several places talking about Eric Bieniemy since this offseason started. So look, first of all, people do generally hire the coordinator because they have greater responsibility. They've been making decisions that are a little more critical, to the outcome of games. So being a coordinator is a significant advantage, and having, if you're a minority coach, being a coordinator, certainly gives you a greater opportunity. But the Eric Bieniemy situation, Tony Dungy and I, again, we talked for days about this. We've both done some interviews and talked about this. It's just such a frustrating situation. The Rooney Rule is about interviews and enhancing the interview process. But, when you're making a hiring decision, performance, should be a big, part of it. And Eric Bieniemy, not just this season, but his playoff calling in each game, the Super Bowl, and then the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl, the way he used, his overall strategy, and then the tactics that he used, I think the running back should have been the MVP of the game because of how astutely he used Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce as decoys, and he had them completely concentrating on them. And the running back was just running the ball down those guys' throats. I don't want to get in any fights with my friends in San Francisco, but it was 10 minutes of the best game calling I've ever seen in my life. And how someone wouldn't want that as someone leading their organization. I was not part of the interviews he did. Maybe he did a bad job, but I would really think about that over and over again and say, wait a minute, how would I not want this performance as part of my team? So the Eric Bieniemy situation is really frustrating to see, because, as I said, it might have been the best coordinator performance in the most highly critical situation I've ever seen, especially each of those games. They're down by at least 10 points. So that doesn't answer your larger question, and the answer to your larger question still is, does it, we need African-American coaches and minority coaches to be coordinators. There's no doubt that is going to be critical to getting hired. Now, do people judge them differently? I mean, token interviews do occur. So there's no question that's part of the problem, is that people make those judgments. People have those biases. As I said, I think that there's all the things I said earlier about the Rooney Rule, I think, are the best answers we have to deal with those biases. I'm not going to pretend like they aren't out there. And the Bieniemy case, to me, is the clearest example you could have. So you know, that's my response to your question. I don't have a great answer. I don't have, hey, yes, this is what can happen, this is what should happen. But it was, you know, in my mind, you know, people really missed an opportunity not hiring an Eric Bieniemy, especially after the performance this past season and particularly this past January. That's a great question. I mean, I'd like to say no, but the results are the results. You know, I believe over time we're going in a direction where, you see the effectiveness of Tony Dungy, you see the effectiveness of Mike Tomlin, you see it over a long period of time. You hope that people learn these, have these lessons learned. Same with Baltimore. Ozzie Newsome is the general manager, retired a year ago, but as much as I hate to give Baltimore, our biggest rival, credit, I mean, Ozzie put together a fantastic team, not just one season, which is great, and you want folks who recently have been successful, but also looking at stability. I think Mike and Ozzie are case studies of this idea that folks are contributing from a standpoint of difference in a way that's creating competitive advantage. I would argue, Seattle might push back a little bit, but after the Patriots, the Steelers and the Ravens have been the best team in football for the last 20 years, and you've had probably the two most high profile minorities in the football operations leading those. So again, I can just give you those examples. It's maybe not the best response to your question, but that's there. People not taking those examples, on one hand, it breaks my heart, and I'm trying to follow my dad's work. As a Steeler, I'm happy that people are making dumb decisions. It makes it easier for us, but it's a shame to see, overall. It's a complex answer, and I'm not going to, I'm not the person who's going to sit here and tell you small-mindedness doesn't exist. And there's not, in every way, you're going to have to push through things that you shouldn't have to push through. And that's disturbing, but that's a reality. To make these changes, you're going to have to deal with that. So many of these great Steeler guys that were my heroes have shared with me their stories from, coming from the civil rights era in the 60s and coming to Pittsburgh, being superstars, and then still having to face, all kinds of horrible experiences and behavior. So, I'm not going to pretend that the Rooney Rule or me or the, any of those things go away. What I do feel like, though, is we're on that path. I think your generation and the generation just ahead of you, I think they're just much more comfortable, which means there's less bias. They're more aware of when their biases are playing out, I think, in many ways. And ultimately, I think these jobs are going to come down to competitive qualities. And we live in a world now where, we can do enough analysis, whether it's a personality characteristic or other things based on behavior that demonstrate, I think, particularly with some of the data that we're talking about related to women, that everything that's in a job requirement for a head coach nowadays, that women are outperforming men. So Bill Belichick did not play football beyond, he played Division III college football. Mike Tomlin played at William and Mary, but never played in the NFL. There's certainly some value to experience, but that is not, and it should not be the determining factor. So having said that, I think we're turning the corner on that. But unfortunately, there's going to be some pitfalls, if you will, along the way. What you can do is keep talking about this, bring this up to speakers that are on your thing, on these types of environments. Stay engaged in the conversation. Support your female friends when they're getting jobs. Work with them. Know that there are times going to have to, and same with minority friends, they're going to have to put up with some crap that they shouldn't have to. And I'm not saying that anyone should ever be in an unsafe environment or they should put up with that. I'm talking about that people are going to be promoted. Those things are going to happen, and you're going to have to have a voice against it. That's how the Rooney Rule came about. It was quantifiable. It was, there was a lot of analysis put into it, but it was a loud and qualified voice coming from the University of Pennsylvania that really drove this. So, those are the things that are going to have to continue to happen. Your generation has done, your generation gets criticized, and sometimes I see a little bit of that. I have kids that are in that Gen Z and et cetera behavior. But overall, you folks have done a fantastic job of advocating for yourselves, advocating for a world that you see as different. And in every industry, I think that opportunity is there to keep doing that. You also have tools through social media to do it in a way that a generation and a half ago, it took a group of minority coaches and scouts to really hold this meeting. They had this one meeting at the NFL Combine, and it was loud enough, and they had my father come in. They brought people in to really hear this, hear them advocate. But it was one time. It was a very impactful moment. But it was 100 people, 200 people. You folks have the ability to get thousands and millions of people together in these cases and really advocate for it. So, you need to keep doing that. It's several things. We have two former players, Mark Bruner and Chidi Iwoma. So they were both players who indicated to us that they had some interest in scouting. We have, I think, 4 folks that were interns with us. So that's probably the most likely path. They got an internship. I don't know what their pathway was. I can't give you a great example of what their pathway was to that internship. We have Kevin Colbert's son and my brother. So that was, there's some birth aspect to some of this that happens. Those are going to happen because these businesses are family owned. There are a couple folks that I know were referred to by other coaches and scouts to Kevin Colbert, our general manager. So building those relationships, the most obvious path is, get involved as a grad assistant at a university, and make yourself sort of available for scouting intern process. But building networks as Craig Schmidt says, build networks throughout the scouting and coaching industry. Have folks see that that you're someone that's interested. I think another aspect that's unique these days is analytics. If you can demonstrate a strength in analytics, that's another part that's really getting embraced in the scouting world. So having strength there, being able to be part of conferences and events that are looking at sports analytics, in addition to, as I said, sort of just building a network, and showing some experience. It's not a requirement, but some experience in with either, Florida's a big time program, so I'm sure it's very competitive to be a GA or a student assistant there. But go to the Division III level, go to some of these lower levels, and get that experience. And it's going to be a lot of work, but that's the pathway. A couple things. I know all of my answers have been a little long today, so I appreciate. I hope I didn't bore you guys to death, but they were great questions. So I tried to give as much detail as I could. In terms of where you go from here, look, first, let's acknowledge, the Steelers have lost, multi-million dollars this summer without even starting a game because of the Rolling Stones, Kenny Chesney, a couple of these other events that are getting pulled. We're in a tough time. So if you're struggling to find something right away, it's going to be okay. It's going to be tough for a while, and I don't want to sugarcoat that, but it's a good industry. It's an industry that's going to grow. But during this time, if you can do grad work, if that's an impossibility, create your own path of learning. Find a mentor. Find someone that will help you learn about a specific segment of the industry. Volunteer at a high school level or at some other community level. Find some way to stay engaged. It's good for your mental health, and it's also might be an important part of the pathway right now, because you're going to have a while, and for you folks it will seem like a long time. For us older folks, I don't think it's going to feel quite as long, but there's going to be some toughness. Having said that, the opportunity is fantastic for you folks. As I said, I have every belief that this industry is going to grow through streaming, gambling, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but those partnerships are out there and building. People are going to be engaging in sports at a higher level than they ever had, a year from now, 2 years from now, et cetera. And they're going to use tools like Zoom, like all these digital platforms that you folks are just much more comfortable with, you're more adroit with. So one, there might be opportunities for you guys to build your own business or application that might be a great opportunity, because right now is a time where everyone's trying to figure those things out. But secondly, having skills in with these tools is going to put you at an advantage over a 53-year-old like I am. So feel good about that, and think about that. Think about the relationship between streaming and sports entertainment, all these different ways. So I think you should feel good about that. The second thing is, I always tell folks, go to the minor leagues. If you can get an opportunity where you can put on the mascot uniform, balance a budget, sell tickets, go to the airport and pick up the coach or the best player, be part of an important conversation around a marketing strategy. Those are really essential things. As I said, this business is a unique business, and this relationship between this vicarious element of my own emotions and trying to live through someone else, and the passion that I have, and my belief that this organization or this entity is going to allow me to experience that passion. It is different than selling a commodity. And so find opportunity to really understand the nuances of that. And the minor leagues are a great place to really learn a whole lot about that relationship. The next piece I will tell you is, we're not going to hire you to be a fan. The teams aren't hiring you to be a fan. So, make sure you're strong in a discipline, whether it's finance, accounting, marketing, digital marketing. Obviously, if you want to get involved in the team side, understand coaching, scouting, those types of things. But because you love the Steelers or the Gators or some other team, that's not why they're hiring you. They're hiring you to do a specific job. So find as much out about that discipline, and make sure, as Steve said, that you have a resume that is competitive, that demonstrates that you can do something different, that you're able to fulfill that task and the job and the task involved in that job. So those are sort of the high level things. The last thing I'll talk about is the social media world we live in. Just be careful. I know it's the world you guys live in, and I'm not trying to tell you to not live your life. But just know you create a record that someone my age never had a record when I was coming out of college. So, try to limit the things that are going to look stupid or embarrassing, because employers are going to find those things in the social media world we live in. If you made a mistake, it's fine. We all make mistakes. But just understand that the world, or the exposure of the world you live in, is different than the exposure of the world that I lived in. And be aware of that as it relates to your career. And then, and I'm sure we're going to do a little bit more of a sign off here, but, we're in this really strange time. All types of emotions people are going to feel. Take care of yourself and take care of each other. It's time to be good to each other. We're going to all make it through this, and it's going to work better and easier if we find ways to do it together. So, everyone stay safe. And, Craig, I don't know if you have another question. Laura, thank you for everything, but thanks for having me.